What's up, ladies and gentlemen? It's your boy Bullets Gotti. I know I've been gone. I've been what you call a hiatus or whatever. I've been kind of busy working on this Syndicate book series, which is fire. I just finished writing. Well, I finished writing one. I'm not done with two yet. I think that's gonna be the final of the trilogy. But me writing it has been great. Well, I'm writing three. Let me not say two. I'm writing three cause I'm finished with one, I'm finished with two, and I'm writing three right now. So the Syndicate series, that's what I'm really focusing on, like finishing that up, and I'm gonna be back, doing my thing. But I said, let me bless the people with a pre-recording. So got a lot to talk about, man. We got the Charlie Kirk, Hocus. I think I'm gonna start talking about the Charlie Kirk thing. So Charlie Kirk, as y'all see, he got assassinated at his rally in, what was it, Utah? Yeah, Utah. And here's my opinions, right? I'm a student of history. I love history. It's one thing I do when I talk about these type of talks. I talk about history, and I always dial it back into what's going on in the present time. So with the Charlie Kirk situation, I said when I looked at it, right, I'm very familiar with him, very familiar with his platform. Um, I know a lot about him. I've been seeing him for past couple years. I would say maybe the first time I think I saw him, his platform was probably 2023. Yeah, 2023. Yeah, 2023. And I've been really, I tapped into the conservative community sometimes once in a blue moon just to see what type of nonsense they be talking about. So when I looked at the Charlie Kirk situation, and I said, you know, watching how he got assassinated, I said, wow, it's sort of like, because his talking points, he's pro against the liberals. He have this, uh, how can I say, this white power, pro nationalism talking points meets with the John Burke Society, Anglo-Saxon, type of mentality, right? And I said, wow, he reminds me so much of George Lincoln Rockwell. Now, if you don't know who George Lincoln Rockwell is, he was a man that was the head of the American Nazi Party, right? Uh, he was I'm not gonna lie, he was surprise supporter of um, Malcolm X. And he's I would say, a very articulate type of guy. He wasn't a stupid man. He was very articulate. He was from Bloomington, Illinois. Um, he was shot. He was shot and killed the same way like Charlie Kirk. He was assassinated. But he was very much against the popular society, which you may call the liberal society. And a lot of his talking points was basically based on that, right? He called it out and he spoke on it. He spoke on it a lot. And he debated. He wasn't an ignorant guy. A lot of his interviews you can hear is online. He did a whole Playboy interview with Alex Haley. What was in 60? I think he did his interview right after Malcolm X did his interview with Alex Haley. But his interview was done in Playboy magazine, I think 64, 65 maybe. Yeah, 64, 65. And he went to the Nation of Islam, Savior Sunday. He went one time to it. And he basically was like a staunch critic of what was going on in the popular society and how he spoke about liberalism and what he spoke about with the people. Now, later on, I wouldn't say he softened his tone, but he was having conversations, dialogues with people like Malcolm X, even though he was pro for his people, but he was also pro for white supremacy and separatism. Hold on one second, yeah. So with him doing the interview with Alex Haley in Playboy magazine, it basically but it basically showed a different side of him. That he was open-minded to have a conversation with somebody that he spoke against, black people and his talking points, right? But like I said, he was a bigger, like if people really look up his staunch, he was anti, you know, you know, ADL. He was like a lot of these people now that you hear, they take a lot of his talking points. From what he was saying in the 60s and 50s, a lot of people right now was talking about it the same way. So he was murdered in 1967, right? By somebody that was, I would call a disciple and a follower of him. He was a part of the American Nazi Party, the young man that killed him. He's been released out of prison now, the guy that murdered him. But he was sentenced to 20 years. He was paroled in 75, right? But he went back to prison. But he was, captured. And he basically left the party. The guy that killed him, he was of Greek descent. He was a follower of him. He was a follower of him. And with him being a follower, he was from New York also, him being a follower, him joining the American Nazi Party, and being a staunch critic of his, being a staunch supporter of his, and then getting arrested, later on. But he was a follower and he had a conflict with Rockwell. And the conflict that he had, and this is true, is that he called his members of the party blue-eyed devils. And he was basically quoting what Elijah Muhammad was saying. And he was basically going back and forth with Rockwell. And it was a lot of hatred, a lot of hate. And because of his identity of being Greek descent, he ended up, leaving the party. With him leaving the party, this is what happened. He ended up murdering Rockwell. Him murdering Rockwell, he went to jail. Like I said, he did his time. He was arrested for it. But Rockwell had a big support base. And he was very huge. When I tell you he was huge, he was very strong politically in the 60s. I'm talking about from the 50s and 60s. George Lincoln Rockwell was what Charlie Kirk and a lot of these guys that you see now that's on nationalism, timing, that was what he was on in the 50s and 60s. David Duke and all these guys, they took from this man. But he was the face of what white nationalism and a more stoic and a more scholarly like, because he wasn't a dumb man, he wasn't an ignorant man. He was a man that his approach came off as a scholarly like person. So when he got murdered, it shaped, that whole community because he was the face. He was the keynote speaker. This guy, he was in Playboy magazine. He was going to UCLA, to the colleges, having lectures. This is a guy that was debating on TV. He wasn't a guy that wasn't, in the mainstream. He was in the mainstream, right? Now, fast forward. We're in the era of what I would call the nationalism era, right? Where it's about ethno, it's about being pro-ethno and pro-nationalism. And Charlie Kirk and many others like him are promoting the pro-national, ethno, pro-power to their people. So when I heard the situation, I saw the video, I was like, damn. And then it railed to me that this guy, his approach, because if you listen to him, right, you turn on a Charlie Kirk speech or lecture that he does, and then you put on George Lincoln Rockwell, they sound similar. Just a new up-to-date version, just a new, I call him the 2025 George Lincoln Rockwell. But he has the same talking points. I don't know if he studied George Lincoln Rockwell. I don't know if because to me personally, I think he studied him. Because a lot of his talking points just sound so much like a younger version of George Lincoln Rockwell in the 50s and 60s. So his approach was that. And he got the same type of hate that George Lincoln Rockwell had. And now it just shows you what happened. He was killed by somebody that, well, they saying that the guy was he wasn't a conservative, but he was somebody that that was against him. And he assassinated him, at the top of his rise. This guy was at the top because he was really at his top rise. He helped out, like they said, he helped out Trump. He helped out his election. He helped out just being the voice of conservatism for the 21st century. He was the guy that basically rallied the younger, voters. And it's crazy because it's going to be honest with you, it's going to start up a civil war. I've been saying this for the longest, just so the climate of what's going on in America. We got we got martial law being pushed in urban cities where it's where it's black mayors, right? We got divide going on in America right now. Where it's Latinos against white, black against white. It's a whole lot of division, right? And it's getting to the point of a civil war is brewing. I said this on many platforms. People laughed at me when I said this, but you could see it. It wasn't surprising that this happened. I don't think the violence ever was going to stop. I knew eventually it was going to lead to this because of just what's been going on lately in politics and just with this whole, ethno cleansing situation that's going on. So it was bound to happen, but should it happen like that? No, I don't think so. But like Malcolm X said, chickens coming home to roost. And a lot of things that's going on. It's sad. But this is the climate that we're in. It's the climate that we're in. it's just not surprising that it happened like this because, like I said, you know, with the whole George Lincoln Rockwell situation, if people go back and just look at that, this man was the voice of, I would say, a conservative ideology. I would say he was the face of it. Like when I look at Charlie Kirk, I look at, George Lincoln Rockwell and what's my guy? He used to have the show back in the days on PBS. I used to like him. Forgot his name. What's his name again? Like when I look at him, I look at like, William F. Buckley, George Lincoln Rockwell. He's a mixture of those two. Like if people don't know who William F. Buckley is, watch the firing line. He was very conservative. He was a conservative, I would say, voice. He was pro-white Anglo-Saxon, John Burke Society. That's who his components were. That was who his base were. So when you look at him and you look at a George Lincoln Rockwell and you mix them, you get a gumbo, you get a modern age of that. You get a newer version of that. And that was what Charlie Kirk was. He was a newer age of those guys. You really go look at him and you just hear how he talks. He talks just like them. So it's not surprising, man. It's not surprising. They're going, like I said, it's a lot going on in America right now. 2025 is the beginning of the New World Order. Sad to say it.